Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Adam O'Rourke, and I'm here today with Jack Waring, and we're here to talk about challenges that contractors are facing when measuring Scope 3 embodied carbon. Before we get into the detail, this discussion, and it's a very informal discussion, is based around a project that Causeway Technology, Balfour Beatty, Aggregate Industries, Galliford Try and Morgan Sindall have been working on for about 18 months. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a product which essentially makes Scope 3 reporting a lot easier for the supply chain and also for the contractors. And that presents a huge challenge. And so we're going to talk about the challenges we've highlighted so far, the journey we've been on, and the journey we need to do as we move forward. And this is a journey that is pertinent to everybody in the construction industry. The talk will centre around as-built embodied carbon and the challenges faced by suppliers and contractors specifically. So that's a little bit of background about that. Before we get into detail, I'm going to introduce and give a little bit of context to the project, how we got started, what we've been doing so far, what the project does. And then we've got a series of themes, and I'll ask Jack to talk around the themes about the key issues that contractors are having. So obviously Jack is going to give the perspective from Balfour Beatty's point of view, but I'll also chip in and I'll also embellish that with a broader view that the team who've been working on the project have highlighted so far. So that's the plan for the next half hour. We've got questions, or we're ready for questions if people want to put them forward, and at an appropriate point we'll answer those. But before we get started, I'll introduce myself. I'll ask Jack to introduce himself. I will then talk about a bit of context, and then we'll get going. So that's the plan for the next 25 minutes. So I'm Adam O'Rourke. I'm a consultant for Causeway Technology. I've been working on this project now for 18 months. So historically, I'm an academic. I've spent 35 years lecturing and doing research at universities, and my background is sustainability. So that's my background in the sector, and I'm finding this a really interesting challenge and something which is really, really current. And something we need to get a grip of as we move forward. So, Jack, do you just want to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, will do. So I'm Jack Waring. I'm a sustainability manager at Balfour Beatty, and I work specifically within our strategic delivery and group reporting team. Both points I hope you'll realise by the end of this are relevant to what we're talking about. So this is the initiative we're discussing is really going to support our group reporting, and that strategic delivery side of stuff is going on the journey with our supply chain, thinking about all the different practical elements in order to get this delivered at group within Balfour Beatty.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jack. So the context behind this, net zero, the industry has been busy making commitments to net zero, signing up for science-based targets, and the industry is committed to this area. If you dig a bit deeper, when you have to report data and actually start to measure and record your Scope 3 findings, it becomes somewhat difficult. And this particular project really follows on from the excellent work that has been done at the design stage with consultants. The RICS have done some amazing work looking at whole life cost analysis. Letty have done some great work. So there's a huge raft of work going on to actually promote and develop and meet this challenge. But at a contracting level and actually measuring embodied carbon at an as-built stage, this is more challenging. And this is really the nub of what we're doing. And this group came together at the behest of Balfour Beatty, who approached Causeway with a challenge. They were struggling to make sense of their embodied carbon data. They had several embodied calculators within their organisation. The calculators, or the data they were getting from the calculators, was very difficult to actually make any sense of. They were getting third-party verifiers in to validate the data, so the Carbon Trust would come in and validate the carbon data, and the validation wasn't brilliant, plus or minus 100% in terms of the confidence in the data. And that's not Balfour Beatty, that is an industry problem. So Balfour Beatty initially approached Causeway with a view of, can we measure embodied carbon in a different way? And the reason they approached Causeway is that Balfour Beatty use a Causeway product called TradeX. And TradeX is an e-invoicing product. And along with Balfour Beatty, many tier 1 contractors and major suppliers use TradeX to do their e-invoicing within the sector. So they approached us with a view to see if we could use the data that was housed in TradeX as a way of helping them get some confidence within their embodied carbon data measurement. That was the premise, and we set off with Balfour Beatty, and very quickly Morgan Sindall, Galliford Try, Aggregate Industries joined a collective group to work on the problem together. About 6 months ago, we completed a proof of concept where we proved we could actually use information that was going through TradeX to provide embodied carbon values for line-by-line items on invoices. The invoice data had everything we needed to know to do half of the embodied carbon calculation. The only data we required was an embodied carbon factor, and that enabled us to give an embodied carbon value for all the items that were coming through the individual invoices. I may say I'm making this sound a lot easier than it actually was, and there's a long journey that we need to take moving forward. But the proof of concept was using data provided by Aggregate Industries, and so we used their carbon factors to test this process out. And again, a big shout out to Aggregate Industries here, who I would really flag up as having one of the most forward-looking embodied carbon calculators around today. So we use that as a premise, and over the last 6 months, we've been bringing more contractors and suppliers on board to work with us on this challenge. The contractors and suppliers like it. It helps in terms of transparency. It gives confidence, and in a way, it's one sort of truth. If you're measuring embodied carbon at the point of payment, that's going through a financial system which is robust enough to deal with financial information, that should give people very good confidence in the data that is coming out. We're also having the carbon data that we do give out will be verified by a third-party provider as well, again, to give contractors and suppliers additional confidence. So that's the proof of concept, and in many ways that's the easy bit. The challenges are now, as an industry and as a collective, how can we communicate and how can we work as a community to develop and work together so that we can start reporting embodied carbon, scope 3 carbon with confidence. That's really where we come in today with the talk. It's about the challenges and sharing these challenges with you guys and the rest of industry. So that's the context and a bit of background. I'm going to now ask a few questions of Jack to talk about really the underlying issues that exist and the barriers that are currently in place stopping this happening. So, firstly, Jack, what are the challenges that the tier one contractors are facing in relation to scope 3 emissions?
I mean, just to say straight off the bat, it's an extremely significant area for us, but one we've only, as an industry, really just turned to recently. So our scope 1 and 2 is our directly controlled emissions, either directly emitted or not, so you're 1 or 2, but they are directly controlled. We're either putting the fuel into something or we're purchasing the electricity. So we've got so much control over that. And that's been the history up until this point, and that's very much been the focus for most organisations, not just in our sector. So when we go out towards that scope 3, you start to lose a bit of control. So we're then looking to our suppliers and our subcontractors and the other kinds of organisations we're working with. What we've done, looking at this from a project point of view, is realise that is it can be anywhere from kind of 60 to 90% of a project in scale, and our bit is actually relatively small. But there's an expectation that we're looking to decarbonise across that whole field. So it really becomes about engagement and trying to get that data from our supply chain, essentially, which I'm sure people will understand can be quite difficult. So I think that's probably the number one challenge with Scope 3 is that it's not as if there's data sat in one of our systems somewhere that we just need to go and pick at. We need to get it from somebody else. It's about bringing it into our organisation and doing that engagement piece and going to our suppliers and getting that information.
So the scale, we're working with agri industries who have got an excellent system, but how many suppliers would Balfour Beatty be dealing with typically, just to give it an idea of the scale?
I mean, on a typical project, looking at this across business units and the entire business, hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers of various different levels in terms of providing us with materials or services. So we can't individually go to each of those people and ask them, give us the carbon number for that specific thing you delivered on that specific project. It would become unmanageable. We'd need huge whole departments of carbon accountants doing all that work for us. And there's just so many. There's lots of different needs in all our projects, and we need lots of different products.
So that would be true then for Balfour Beatty, any tier one contractor, whether it's suppliers, subcontractors. Big challenge.
Exactly.
So this is one of the things we're working at, and just to give a little bit of insight. On the one hand, I mentioned agri industries. On the other hand, we've been working with suppliers who are multinational companies. Their data in terms of embodied carbon will consist of maybe one EPD, which might cover 50,000 different products. So the spectrum in terms of data that's available is huge. The level of understanding on part of the suppliers is variable to say the least, and the capacity of tier one contractors to actually manage, report, and detail that it's impossible. So using the this particular project that we're on, putting it through an invoicing tool, which many of these subcontractors, suppliers, contractors are using, seems a really simple and sensible way to go. And that really was a driver in the contractors approaching Causeway to say, look, can we do this? So we've got the idea, but I think collectively we all need to think about how we can get on board, how we can communicate, and how we can have conversations, more conversations like this with the rest of the sector. So that's obviously from the contractors. What issues do you see then with suppliers? What typical things might crop up, issues in relation to data, whatever it might be?
I mean, you mentioned a great example with the idea of a whole range of products having a single environmental product declaration. So that would be one carbon footprint for all their different iterations of their material they supply to us. Now, that's not uncommon. It can be quite costly to go and get those environmental product declarations. And there's I think the approach we've taken almost we don't want that to be a barrier to working with us, or
Yeah.
you might have a great product, but you haven't got the right team behind you who can tell you exactly the embodied carbon in that through your typical kind of traditional methods. So I think that's probably one of the kind of key difficulties. And products change regularly. You end up with a new supplier for your raw materials, or even your routes of transportation change for various different reasons, and all of that has an impact on your embodied carbon. So I think the further you track this back to that kind of raw material, the added levels of complexity for each of those different people along that chain. So it's incredibly difficult for our suppliers to know the carbon footprint of each of those products. And some of them will be really engaged with it. Some of them will be brand new to this. They won't have even thought of it potentially. That it might be the information we're interested in as a contractor.
Yeah, and again, within an invoice, we've got who it's to, where it's from, travel distance, quantities, description, product numbers. So much of this information already exists. And I think as a group, one of the things we've spoken about is 20 years ago, e-invoicing was alien. Many people had not heard of it. And even to this day, some major organizations are still not fully into e-invoicing. But there is the experience, and there are communities who've been working in this now for a long time. And what we want to try and do is harness this experience and apply it to embodied carbon accountancy, for want of a better word. And it's an exciting time to be getting into this, but extremely challenging. Another issue, I suppose, which is fundamental to do this is partnership and collaboration. So again, how do Balfour Beatty see that as being part of this entire process?
I think it might sound counterintuitive, but taking a step back and then involving Causeway in this kind of whole equation actually paves the way for more collaboration, because we're not then dependent on that supplier giving us their own process, or the thousands of different processes we'd be engaging with. If we kind of went to each of them individually, it gives us that level playing field where we can heat map through the kind of the information we've got. We can gather all that data through on the invoices, and it's independent, like you say. It's work that you'll be providing to the various contractors. It then just frees us up to then go and have those conversations, and we know we're not there with all the products that we're using, and there are decarbonisation roadmaps for various different materials and products and services, but it gives us that we can engage on that topic properly then once we're actually collecting the actual data, rather than it just be theoretical, as some of it kind of has been to date. It gives us the as-built carbon that we talked about.
And I think just to build on that point that Jack makes about collaboration and the importance of data, that the proof of concept, we looked through all of Balfour Beatty's invoices for a year, and it was broken down into different divisions. And one of the things that jumped out, and it wasn't just for Balfour Beatty's data, it was true for Galliford Try, Morgan Sindall as well. It was quite clear that certain divisions were more proactive in the use of environmentally friendly materials. But having data allows you to make better sustainable procurement decisions, and the group were really buoyed by that the first time they've got data in front of them to do something with. And we talked about partnerships. There's been a great deal of interest, I think, in this project. So Kia will be joining our group very, very shortly, and we've got other large tier 1 contractors, big suppliers, builders, merchants, who are all coming on board to try and work together collectively to give all of us in the industry that confidence that we need to move forward with data. And that perhaps brings me on to the next question in terms of the benefits of measuring Scope 3 embodied carbon at the point of payment, paid for carbon.
Yeah, I mean, there's two kind of different points I want to talk about. So the first one is there's a lot of carbon calculators out there, and that's and there's a real need for that. It is absolutely essential that we're able to do upfront estimations of carbon and carbon budget setting on projects, and there's different sorts of exercises, and looking at that in terms of what are our expectations of a project. But if you relate that to the financial analogy, that is your budget setting. That is your to date, we're not actually looking at what's our spend, what's our actual in that field. So to me, that's the kind of way I picture it, is that you've got that upfront estimation of carbon, and then your this initiative is collecting the actual. So it's how have we actually performed against what we thought we'd set out to do? Are we able to get those materials we thought we'd be able to get? Are they coming from the same place we expected? And it's a real look at what's the real world out there, what's the actual world of construction looking like from a carbon point of view. The other point is, one you've already mentioned, is that there's so much really useful information in each of those invoices. When we do this as an exercise, and what we have done in previous years, and is kind of a fairly standard industry practice, is that we look at it on spend categories, and we would estimate our carbon in association with those to estimate our whole group, scope 3. But that might be the likes of quarry products being a category, and we look at our whole spend as a group on quarry products, and then have a look at what factor we might use to estimate our carbon there. That doesn't then necessarily give you the ability to drill down and look where it's being done well, where it's being used lots of, and how to kind of really assess where that carbon's all coming from and being used on our projects. So having it at that line item within the invoice gives us our actuals at a level that we can really work with and actually make some significant changes to how we work and who we engage with and what we procure, and that side of things is really exciting. I think.
Fantastic. There's a couple of questions that I've seen, Jack, that I'll just quickly go through. I think Mike Silver, yes, AI. It's not necessarily. I think aggregates are quite straightforward, Mike. I don't think they'd agree with you about different concrete mixes they've got, but I do take your point about M&E and hayback facade systems. What we tried to do really at the proof of concept stage is we took some big hitters and we're concentrated on steel and concrete, and we're now moving into the HEBAC, and we haven't done anything on HEBAC other than work with clients. The Dodd Group are working with a client. They use TradeX, and we're going to start tapping into how to work through their invoice data to get embodied carbon factors. But again, I agree, it will be a challenge. It won't be easy, but it's something we're up for. The one part of the group that I've not mentioned is, in addition to the suppliers and the contractors, we set up a knowledge transfer protocol through Innovate UK with Bath University, which in essence, we need some brains really right at the front of this, looking at dealing with uncertainty in the measurement of embodied carbon, looking at flows of materials. So we've got an associate who'll be starting working with Causeway and Bath University in the next couple of weeks. And this project is just about really to start ramping up in terms of pulling more data in. So it's getting to although we're all excited, we're getting to the interesting stage now. And certainly M&E and HEBAC is definitely on that and will be a challenge. Lydia, was it Sarah Lynch mentions breaking down material data within work packages with different suppliers. Again, the subcontractor piece is a huge issue. I don't know, Jack, if you want to talk about you as a tier one and how you mandating things and things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a subject we're engaging with our supply chain on in terms of that subcontract work anyway. When we look at this, I mean, we talk about this in terms of scope 3, and that's our corporate carbon reporting requirement is to break it down into that box of scope 3. But if you look at it from the point of view of a project, you will very often have targets in relation to materials. You'll break it down into a different way, where you're looking at the product stage, the construction stage, and your A1 to A3, A4, A5, and the other way of looking at carbon. Now, in those instances, our clients, the projects we're working on, they don't really care if it's us putting diesel in a generator or our subcontractors, and they don't care if it's us buying the bricks or it's our our subcontractors. So we already need this information. We're already after this. And what we would love to see is others adopting the same approach as us and making use of the services that are out there to collect carbon data. So if our subcontractors come on the journey with us and use this method in order to collect their carbon data, it would be very easy for them to share it with us. Or one of the things we will potentially discuss in this group with as we move kind of further down maturity is passing that through. It's passing that through to us on an invoice so that we get the carbon aspect of what they've delivered to us. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one. It's obviously the further removed you get from that stage, the more difficult it gets to get back to that actual carbon. But it's one we absolutely need to tackle, and we'll be working closely with our supply chain on that aspect.
And I think the TradeX advantage there is they've got between 60 and 70,000 suppliers using the invoicing system, but that it doesn't cover a huge amount of subcontractors who are part of the supply chain. And there's a big education piece aligned to this particular work, doing the actual the science, creating a product, doing the mathematics to extract data to create an embodied carbon. I think that's the easy bit. The education piece, the community piece, the collaboration piece is equally, if not more important, if we're going to really make grounds on this quickly. There's another question there in relation to, I think Jack just alluded to that one, in terms of looking at modules within life cycle costing. And within module A, is it A1, 2, 3, or 5? Currently, we're just doing A1 to A3, but the invoices contain all of the travel distance data, so it isn't too difficult for us to do A4. And in relation to A5, in terms of the construction site, Balfour, very early on in the project, Balfour gave us all of their data relating to a site, i.e. the factory, the build. And we went through absolutely everything: wheelbarrows, brushes, mats. And interestingly, in terms of the A5, I think 96% of the embodied carbon was associated with diesel.
Yeah.
So when we can do that, I think as this product matures, we will start to do it. But I think what we're going to see, it's all about fuel with regard to the actual construction process itself.
Yeah, taking it back to that other way of cutting it, typically the A1 to A3 is, and a lot of the A4, so that real product carbon, and then the transportation of that product to our gate is our scope 3, and then typically that A5 portion will be our scope 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So that's the electricity we're bringing into site, the diesel we're using in generators, and all those bits. So that's kind of a separate area that we've had a lot more control over for a long time, and have very different targets and initiatives and things related to it.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of the time. I think that's it. There's a lot more we need to do. I think it's exciting. It's definitely challenging. There's a long journey we're going to have to make on this, and I think the more of us who can work together, the actual better, because we certainly need it. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah,
thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.